When Sarah Johnson woke up that morning, she had no idea her life was about to change forever. At just 27 years old, her days were filled with routine, dreams of the future, and the quiet hope that her life had meaning. But everything came crashing down when she was involved in a fatal car accident that should have ended her life. Yet, as her heart stopped and her world faded to black, something extraordinary happened. Sarah experienced what many call a near-death experience, NDE. And in that moment, she found herself standing in the presence of Jesus. What he revealed to her were 3 stunning events destined to unfold before 2028. Events that would change humanity as we know it. Sarah's story is a journey of revelation, faith, and the awe-inspiring mysteries of the divine. The day had started like any other for Sarah Johnson. She awoke to the soft hum of her alarm, the faint rays of sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. Her 27th birthday had just passed a week ago, and she felt a quiet optimism about the future. Life wasn't perfect, but she had a job she didn't hate, friends she loved, and dreams she hadn't quite given up on. There was always a sense that something bigger awaited her, a purpose she had yet to uncover. That night, the rain came out of nowhere. The weatherman on the morning news had mentioned a slight chance of scattered showers, but this was no ordinary drizzle. Thick sheets of rain lashed against the windshield of her small sedan as she drove home from her best friend's apartment. The once familiar streets felt foreign, blurred by the downpour and the dim glow of streetlights. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, and her eyes darted nervously between the road and her rearview mirror. Visibility was poor, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminated the sky, making the shadows of trees dance eerily on the pavement. Sarah hated driving in the rain, but she reassured herself that she was almost home. Just a few more minutes, she thought. The intersection ahead was empty, at least it seemed to be. She slowed down, peering through the watery veil covering her windshield. Her heart raced as she cautiously approached the blinking yellow light, her foot hovering over the brake pedal. And then it happened. Out of the corner of her eye, a pair of headlights appeared, barreling toward her with terrifying speed. There was no time to react, no time to scream. The other car, a dark SUV, collided with her sedan with an earth-shattering force. The sound of metal crunching against metal filled the air, mingling with the shriek of tires skidding on wet asphalt. The impact sent Sarah's car spinning, her body jerking violently against the seatbelt. Everything seemed to slow down. She was vaguely aware of the airbag deploying, the suffocating smell of burnt rubber, and the piercing pain shooting through her chest. And then, just as quickly as it began, it was over. Her car came to a stop, its front end mangled and unrecognizable. Rain continued to pour, now mingling with the faint wail of approaching sirens in the distance. Sarah's vision blurred, her head pounding as if her skull had been split open. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. Panic surged through her, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of calm. The pain dulled, the noise faded, and her breath, shallow and labored, came to a stop. As her eyes closed for what she thought was the last time, Sarah felt herself being lifted. It wasn't like being pulled upward by a physical force. It was more like gravity had released her, and she was floating effortlessly. The wreckage of her car and the chaotic scene below grew distant, as though she were rising above it all. There was no fear, no sadness, only a serene detachment. The world around her dissolved into a brilliant, ethereal light. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, brighter than the sun, yet soothing to the eyes. She found herself standing in a vast, boundless space where time seemed to have no meaning. The ground beneath her feet wasn't solid, but she felt stable, as if she belonged there. Then she saw him, The figure before her radiated a love so pure and unconditional that it brought her to tears. She didn't need to ask who he was. She knew. It was Jesus. His presence was overwhelming yet gentle, like the embrace of a long-lost friend. He wore a simple white robe, his features both familiar and otherworldly. His eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to see every part of her, every joy, every pain, every secret. And yet they held no judgment, only love. "Sarah," he said, his voice like a melody that resonated in her very soul, "your time is not yet over." She wanted to speak, to ask a million questions, but her voice wouldn't come. It didn't matter, though. Somehow, he understood everything she wanted to say. "There is much for you to see, much for you to do," he continued. "But before you return, I must show you what lies ahead." Before she could process his words, the space around them shifted. The light dimmed slightly, and scenes began to unfold before her, vivid and alive. It was as if she were watching a series of events play out in real time, but she was more than a spectator. She felt the emotions of the people in the visions, their hopes and fears coursing through her. But there was something else too. Even in the darkest moments of what she saw, there was a thread of hope, a reminder that light could still prevail. She didn't fully understand what she was being shown, but she trusted him, knowing that whatever it was important. "Remember what you see, and remember my words," Jesus said. "When you return, you must share this with the world." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. She felt an ache in her chest, not from pain, but from the thought of leaving this place, leaving him. She wanted to stay, to bask in the peace and love that surrounded her, but she knew her journey wasn't over. "Go now," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Live, and do not be afraid, for I am always with you." In an instant, the light faded and the world came rushing back. The blaring of sirens, the metallic taste of blood in her mouth, the sharp pain in her ribs, it all hit her at once. She gasped, her lungs filling with air, and her eyes flew open. She was alive. As paramedics worked to free her from the wreckage, Sarah's mind reeled from what she had experienced. It wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. She knew that with every fiber of her being. She had seen him, heard his voice, and felt his love. And now she carried with her a message that would change her life, and perhaps the lives of many others, forever. Sarah sat in her hospital bed, the pale fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow on the whitewashed walls. Machines beeped rhythmically around her, reminders of the thin line she had walked between life and death. Her body ached, her ribs bruised, and her head pounded, but her spirit felt different. She couldn't shake the clarity of what she had seen. It was as if her soul had been forever altered, touched by something beyond human comprehension. Her mind replayed the first vision Jesus had shown her. She could still see it vividly, as if it had been burned into her memory. It began with a single image, a room full of people, their voices rising in heated debate. The scene was eerily familiar. A conference room, perhaps a government meeting. Men and women sat around a long table, their faces contorted with anger. They were shouting over each other, their words unintelligible, yet charged with emotion. No one was listening, no one seemed willing to compromise. The scene widened, and Sarah saw this division spreading like wildfire. Streets were filled with protesters, their faces obscured by masks, their signs held high with bold slogans scrawled across them. Some marched for justice, others for freedom, but all were shouting at the top of their lungs. The cacophony was deafening, drowning out any possibility of understanding. She saw families divided, sitting at dinner tables in stony silence or hurling accusations at one another. Parents and children, siblings and friends. Relationships that had once been strong were now fragile and fractured. It wasn't just disagreements, it was a fundamental breakdown of connection, a loss of trust and empathy. "Why is this happening?" Sarah had asked Jesus in the vision, her heart aching as she watched the chaos unfold. "It is the result of fear," he replied, his voice calm yet filled with sorrow. "Fear divides, while love unites. When fear takes root, it blinds people to their shared humanity." As he spoke, Sarah felt the weight of those words. She had seen fear before, on the news, in her own life. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of those who were different. But this was something deeper, something more insidious. It was a fear that fed on itself, growing stronger with every act of hatred, every unkind word, every refusal to understand. The vision shifted, and she found herself standing in the middle of a bustling city. Skyscrapers loomed overhead, their glass facades reflecting a sky that seemed darker than it should have been. The streets were crowded, but the people moved with a cold efficiency, their faces glued to their devices. Sarah noticed something strange. Despite the crowds, there was a profound sense of loneliness. People passed each other without acknowledgement, their eyes empty, their movements robotic. Technology had advanced in ways Sarah couldn't have imagined. She saw people wearing sleek devices that projected holographic screens in front of their eyes. They spoke to artificial intelligences more than they did to each other. Social media, once a tool for connection, had become a battlefield of misinformation and manipulation. Algorithms fed people only what they wanted to see, deepening the divides between them. Sarah's heart broke as she saw a young girl sitting alone on a park bench, her face illuminated by the glow of her tablet. Around her, other children played, but none approached her. The girl's eyes flickered with sadness, a longing for something she couldn't name. Sarah wanted to reach out to her, to tell her she wasn't alone, but she couldn't. She was only an observer, powerless to intervene. "Is this the future?" she asked Jesus, her voice trembling. "It is one possible future," he said, "but it is not inevitable." The vision continued to expand, showing Sarah the global consequences of division. Nations turned against each other, alliances crumbled, and wars broke out over resources, power, and ideology. She saw leaders standing at podiums, their speeches laced with rhetoric designed to inflame rather than heal. The media amplified the chaos, twisting facts into weapons of persuasion. Yet, even amid the darkness, Sarah noticed glimmers of hope. She saw small groups of people coming together, not out of anger or fear, but out of love and a shared desire for peace. They sat in circles, listening to one another, their hands clasped in solidarity. These groups were few and far between, but their light was undeniable. It pierced through the shadows, reminding Sarah that all was not lost. "Love can still prevail," Jesus said, as if reading her thoughts. "But it must be chosen. It cannot be forced." Sarah realized the enormity of what she was seeing. The division wasn't just about politics or ideology, it was a spiritual battle, a struggle for the soul of humanity. She felt a deep urgency to share what she had witnessed, to warn people of the dangers of letting fear take control. As the vision faded, Sarah found herself back in the boundless space where she had first met Jesus. He looked at her with a compassion that brought tears to her eyes. "Sarah," he said, "the world is at a crossroads. What you have seen is a choice, not a certainty. The path humanity takes depends on the choices made by each individual. Tell them to choose love over division, to listen with open hearts and open minds. Tell them to remember that they are all children of the same Creator." Those words echoed in her mind as she lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. She knew the task ahead of her would not be easy. The world was so deeply entrenched in its divisions, its fears. But she also knew she couldn't stay silent. She had been given a gift, a glimpse of what could be, and with it, a responsibility. Even as exhaustion weighed on her, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The vision had shown her the worst, but it had also shown her the best of what humanity was capable of. And she knew that, with faith and courage, it was possible to choose a better path. Sarah had barely begun to process the first vision when Jesus guided her into another, one that was entirely different, yet equally profound. The light surrounding them shifted, and she felt herself being pulled downward, not in a frightening way, but as if she were sinking into the earth itself. When the sensation stopped, she was standing in a landscape that was both achingly beautiful and deeply unsettling. Before her stretched a lush forest, its trees towering high into the sky. The air was thick with the scent of earth and rain, and the sound of birdsong echoed through the canopy. Yet there was an undercurrent of unease. The ground beneath her feet trembled faintly, a vibration she could feel in her chest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sense of urgency. At first, everything seemed alive, vibrant. Rivers flowed with crystalline water, animals darted through the underbrush, and flowers bloomed in an explosion of color. But as Sarah walked deeper into the vision, she noticed subtle changes. The rivers ran faster, their currents growing stronger and more erratic. The animals began to scatter, their movements frantic as though sensing an unseen danger. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with an ominous haze that seemed to creep in from the horizon. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Jesus stood beside her, his expression calm yet tinged with sorrow. "The earth is crying out," he said. "It bears the weight of humanity's choices, and it cannot sustain them forever." As he spoke, the ground beneath them shook violently. Sarah stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby tree for balance. She watched in horror as the tranquil forest transformed into chaos. Trees toppled as a massive earthquake rippled through the land, leaving deep fissures in its wake. The rivers, once calm, overflowed their banks, sweeping away everything in their path. Animals fled in every direction, their cries of distress echoing in the tumult. The scene shifted abruptly, and Sarah found herself standing on the edge of a vast coastline. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, its waves crashing against the shore with increasing ferocity. She could feel the salt spray on her face, taste it on her lips. But something was wrong. The water was rising, creeping closer and closer to the land. Entire towns disappeared beneath the waves, their lights flickering out one by one. People ran in panic, their faces etched with fear. Families clung to each other as they fled, their belongings hastily thrown into backpacks and carts. Sarah's heart broke as she saw a child, no older than 5, clutching a stuffed animal as his mother carried him through the rising waters. "This isn't punishment," Jesus said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It is the earth seeking balance. Humanity has forgotten its role as steward of creation." Sarah understood what he meant. She saw the factories spewing smoke into the sky, the oceans choked with plastic, the forests cleared for profit. It wasn't a single act that had brought the earth to this point, but a culmination of countless small choices made over generations. Choices driven by greed, ignorance, and a disregard for the interconnectedness of all life. Yet, amid the devastation, Sarah noticed something unexpected. In the distance, she saw a small group of people planting trees in the scorched earth. They worked tirelessly, their hands dirty, but their spirits determined. Nearby, others were cleaning a polluted river, their faces bright with hope, as they pulled trash from the water. These acts, though small, radiated a light that cut through the darkness. "Is there still time?" Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. "There is always time," Jesus replied, his gaze fixed on the people who were working to heal the land. "But it requires a change of heart. Humanity must remember its connection to the earth, to each other, and to me." The vision shifted again, and Sarah was now standing in the middle of a bustling city. The streets were hot, the air thick with smog. She watched as people went about their daily lives, oblivious to the impact of their actions. Cars idled in traffic, their exhaust filling the air. Trash littered the sidewalks, much of it carelessly tossed aside. But then something extraordinary happened. A young woman, dressed in a simple uniform, knelt down to pick up a piece of trash. Others noticed her and began to follow her lead. Soon, dozens of people joined in, their small actions snowballing into something larger. The streets began to clear, and the air felt a little lighter. Sarah saw communities coming together, not just to clean, but to reimagine their way of life. She saw cities embracing renewable energy, farmers returning to sustainable practices, and schools teaching children about the importance of caring for the planet. These changes weren't easy, but they were powerful, driven by a collective realization that humanity's survival depended on its willingness to live in harmony with the earth. Jesus turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with a deep compassion. The earth was given to humanity as a gift, a home to be cherished and nurtured. But it is not indestructible. Its cries are a call to awaken, not just to the physical dangers, but to the spiritual disconnect that has allowed this to happen. Sarah nodded, her mind racing with everything she had seen. She realized that the vision wasn't just about environmental destruction, it was about humanity's relationship with creation, with each other, and with the Creator. The Earth's suffering was a reflection of humanity's own brokenness, but it was also an invitation to heal. As the vision faded, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She understood that the future wasn't set in stone. It was a tapestry being woven with every choice, every action, every moment of love or indifference. The Earth's awakening was a reminder that humanity had the power to create a different story, a story of restoration, of unity, of hope. And she knew she had to share this story, to remind people that they were not separate from the Earth, but an integral part of it, that in healing the world around them, they could also heal themselves. Sarah had expected the next vision to be as heavy and foreboding as the others, filled with challenges and warnings. Instead, when the world around her shifted again, she was enveloped in a radiant glow that seemed to pour directly into her soul. She was standing in the middle of an open field, the grass vibrant and green, swaying gently in a warm breeze. The air was alive with a sense of peace she couldn't put into words, and the sky above was the clearest blue she had ever seen. For the first time since the accident, she felt a deep, unshakable calm. But it wasn't the beauty of the scene that struck her, it was the people. All around her, people were gathering. Some were walking hand in hand, others came alone, but all wore expressions of hope and reverence. They came from every walk of life, young and old, rich and poor, every culture and every creed. It was as though an invisible thread had pulled them together, uniting them in a way that transcended differences. At first, Sarah thought they were heading toward a single destination, but then she noticed something remarkable. They weren't gathering in one place, they were gathering everywhere. Across cities and towns, fields and deserts, homes and streets, people were coming together. The scene expanded, and Sarah saw groups forming all over the world. What struck her most was the light radiating from each person. It wasn't visible to the eye, but felt deeply within, a warmth that pulsed with love and faith. "This is the great revival," Jesus said, standing beside her. His voice was soft but filled with certainty. "It is not led by a single person or nation, but by the hearts of those who remember who they are." Sarah turned to him, her mind racing. "What are they remembering?" "They are remembering me," he replied simply, his eyes meeting hers. "But more than that, they are remembering the truth of their own spirits, that they were created in love for love." She watched as the revival unfolded before her eyes. People knelt in prayer, their faces lifted toward the heavens, their hands clasped tightly as they wept with joy. It wasn't the somber, ritualistic prayer she had seen in some churches. This was alive, raw, and deeply personal. It was as if each person had been touched directly by God, their hearts opening in a way that defied explanation. She saw churches overflowing with people, but they were different now. The walls didn't seem to matter, nor did the denominations or doctrines. Worship spilled out into the streets, into parks, into homes. Strangers embraced, their tears mingling as they shared stories of healing, forgiveness, and transformation. In one scene, Sarah saw a man standing on a street corner, his clothes tattered and his face worn by years of hardship. He held a sign that read, "Need help." In the vision, she watched as a young woman approached him, her face glowing with compassion. Instead of handing him money and walking away, she knelt beside him, took his hand, and prayed with him. The man's expression shifted, his eyes filling with tears as a new light seemed to awaken within him. In another part of the vision, she saw a family gathered around a table, their hands joined in prayer. The father, who had once been absent and distant, was now leading his children in thanksgiving. The mother's face glowed with peace, and the children laughed with a joy that was infectious. It wasn't wealth or success that had brought them this happiness. It was the simple act of reconnecting with each other and with God. As the revival continued to unfold, Sarah noticed something even more profound: the ripple effects of love and faith. Acts of kindness spread like wildfire. A single person's choice to forgive inspired others to do the same. A small act of generosity sparked a chain reaction of giving. It was as though humanity was remembering a truth it had long forgotten. That love was the most powerful force of all. She turned to Jesus, her heart swelling with hope. How does this happen? How does the world change so much? "It begins with a whisper," he said, his gaze fixed on the scenes before them. "One heart at a time, one act of faith, one act of love. When people remember me, they remember who they were created to be. And when they choose love over fear, the light spreads." Sarah watched as the light grew brighter. It wasn't just spiritual. It was tangible. Communities that had been divided began to reconcile. Leaders who had once sought power now sought peace. Families that had been broken by resentment found healing. It wasn't perfect. There were still struggles, still moments of doubt. But the momentum was undeniable. She saw a young boy standing on a hill, looking out over his village. He held a small candle in his hand, its flame flickering in the breeze. As he raised it high, others around him began to do the same. Soon, the hillside was aglow with hundreds of tiny flames, their light visible for miles. Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat as she realized the significance of what she was seeing. "Even the smallest light can dispel the darkness," Jesus said. "And when lights join together, they can illuminate the entire world." The vision shifted one final time, and Sarah found herself standing in the middle of a vast crowd. She couldn't see where it began or ended. It stretched as far as the eye could see. The people around her were singing, their voices rising in perfect harmony. It wasn't a song she recognized, but the melody was so beautiful, so pure, that it brought her to her knees. The words weren't in any one language. They transcended language. They were a hymn of unity, of faith, of love. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope, of gratitude. She understood now what Jesus had meant when he said the revival wouldn't be led by one person. It wasn't about a leader. It was about the collective awakening of humanity, the realization that every person carried a spark of the divine within them. When the vision faded and she returned to the boundless space where she stood with Jesus, Sarah's heart felt full to the point of bursting. She turned to him, overwhelmed by everything she had seen. "Will it really happen?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It is already beginning," he said, his eyes filled with love. "The seeds are being planted, but the harvest depends on the choices of each person. Tell them, Sarah. Tell them what you have seen. Remind them that they are not alone, that they are loved, and that they have the power to choose light over darkness." She nodded, her resolve strengthening. She didn't know how she would share this message or if anyone would listen, but she knew she had to try. The revival she had witnessed was more than just a vision. It was a promise, a glimpse of what could be if humanity chose to remember its true purpose. As the light around her began to fade, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She knew her journey wasn't over, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly connected to herself, to others, and to the Creator who had shown her the beauty of what was possible. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was back in her hospital bed. The stark white ceiling above her seemed cold and unfeeling, a sharp contrast to the warmth and light she had just left. Her body ached, her chest felt tight, and every breath came with a twinge of pain. But none of that mattered. She was alive. More than that, she had returned with a purpose. Her first moments back were a blur of medical staff checking her vitals, their voices muffled as though she were underwater. She could see their lips moving, hear the faint hum of machines beeping steadily, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop replaying what she had seen, what she had felt. The visions were vivid, like they had been etched into her soul. The faces of the people, the light, the hope. It was all so real. As the nurses adjusted her IV and scribbled notes on their charts, Sarah mustered the strength to speak. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. What happened? One of the nurses, a kind-looking woman with glasses perched on the edge of her nose, leaned in closer. "You were in a serious car accident," she said gently. "You're lucky to be alive. The paramedic said your heart stopped for nearly 3 minutes." 3 minutes. That was all it had been in the physical world. But to Sarah, it felt like she had been gone for hours, perhaps even days. Time had no meaning where she had been. As the nurse left to update the doctor, Sarah lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. The weight of what she had experienced pressed down on her. But it wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility. She had been shown things that no one else had seen, things that could change the course of the future if people were willing to listen. Her recovery was slow, but steady. Over the next few days, Sarah began to piece together the details of her accident. The SUV that had struck her had skidded on the wet road, its driver unable to stop in time. The crash had left her car in ruins, and it was a miracle she had survived. The doctors marveled at how quickly she was healing, though they had no explanation for it. Sarah didn't try to explain it to them. How could she? How could she possibly put into words what had happened to her during those 3 minutes? But as her physical wounds began to mend, the weight of her experience grew heavier. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself. She had to tell someone, even if they thought she was crazy. The visions weren't just for her, they were a message for the world. The problem was, she had no idea where to start. Her first attempt came during a visit from her best friend, Mia. Mia had been by her side through thick and thin, the kind of friend who could read Sarah's mood with a single glance. But even Mia couldn't have prepared for what Sarah was about to tell her. "You're looking better," Mia said, settling into the chair beside Sarah's bed. "I was so scared when I heard what happened. I thought I was going to lose you." Sarah reached for Mia's hand, squeezing it weakly. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. "Something happened to me when I was unconscious." Mia tilted her head, her expression shifting from relief to concern. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. "I saw him, Mia. I saw Jesus." For a moment, Mia didn't respond. She stared at Sarah, her brow furrowed. "You mean, like, in a dream?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "It wasn't a dream. It was real. I don't even know how to describe it. I was somewhere else, and he showed me things. Things about the future." Mia's expression softened, but there was a hint of skepticism in her eyes. "The future? Like, what kind of things?" Sarah launched into the story, her words tumbling out in a rush. She told Mia about the visions of division, the earth crying out, and the great revival. She described the people she had seen, the light, the hope, and the message Jesus had given her. She spared no detail, even as Mia's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. When she finished, there was a long silence. Mia stared at her, then glanced down at her hands, fidgeting nervously. "Sarah," she said carefully, "you've been through a lot. The accident, the trauma. Maybe your mind is just trying to make sense of it all." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had expected this reaction, but it didn't make it any easier. "I know how it sounds," she said, her voice breaking. "But I'm telling you, it was real. I felt it. I lived it." Mia hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Okay, maybe it was real. I don't know. But what are you supposed to do about it?" That question stayed with Sarah long after Mia left. What was she supposed to do? How could she, an ordinary woman, possibly share a message this big? She felt overwhelmed, but she also felt a pull deep within her, a call to act, no matter how daunting it seemed. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began sharing her story with others. At first, it was just close friends and family, many of whom reacted with the same mix of skepticism and concern that Mia had shown. But Sarah didn't let that stop her. She spoke with a conviction that surprised even herself, driven by the knowledge that the visions weren't hers to keep. They belonged to the world. Word began to spread. Some people dismissed her as delusional, but others listened. They saw the sincerity in her eyes, the passion in her voice. She started writing down everything she had seen, pouring her heart into pages of notes that would eventually become the foundation of her message. Before long, Sarah was invited to share her story at local churches and community gatherings. She spoke not as a preacher or prophet, but as someone who had been given a glimpse of something extraordinary. Her words weren't about fear or condemnation, they were about hope. She reminded people that they had the power to choose a better path, to turn away from division and embrace unity, to heal the earth and each other. Her story resonated with many, sparking conversations and inspiring small acts of change. People began to see themselves as part of something greater, their individual choices contributing to a collective transformation. As 2028 drew closer, Sarah's message gained momentum. She didn't claim to know exactly how the future would unfold, only that the choices made today would shape what was to come. And though the path wasn't easy, she believed with all her heart that humanity was capable of choosing light over darkness, love over fear. Sarah's journey wasn't without its challenges, but she never wavered in her mission. She had seen what was possible, and she carried that vision with her every day, a beacon of hope in a world that so desperately needed it.